Today on the Feck It No More podcast, we welcome James, who takes us deep into the moment where his whole world flipped. Walking in on his wife's affair, staring down the rage he thought he'd never be able to control, and choosing to walk away for the sake of his kids. From sitting on a curb at a servo at 3 a.m. after another night out, sitting with a sausage roll in his hand, wondering, who am I becoming, to transforming that rock bottom into a new beginning. James learnt that sometimes the lowest point is the start of your strongest chapter. We dive into his ultra-running bandaid, the emotional roller coaster of rebuilding his life as a co-parent, and a surprising truth about self-doubt, why it drove him, how it made him question everything, and why today he's starting to choose self-belief. If you've ever felt lost, blindsided, or like life's throwing you a punch you never seen coming, this one's gonna hit home and provides you useful insights into what you should be thinking about doing next. If you know somebody that needs to hear this right now, show them you care and send them this. Let's get into it.
I think for me, the most confusing part is like when you hear stories like this, everyone will be sitting there going, "Well, there's always another side to the story." And I love the saying, if there's three sides to the story, there's mine, there's hers, and there's the truth. But I think for me, leading up to it, I was blindsided in a way. I truly do believe that. Like, and I think it comes down to the personality that I do have and where I was at. And that contentness of just thinking that, you know, like life is, how can it not be great? Because if that makes sense. And I think leading up on my behalf, maybe there is stuff I could have done differently, maybe there was, but I truly do believe to this day that I did everything that I possibly wanted to. Whether that was enough or not, I don't know. I worked, I provided, I did all the things you're meant to do. Like maybe
Dinner is like everything else in life, it's just between.
Never fail.
I need to know to get to where I want to go.
James, welcome to the Feck It No More podcast. Thank you for being here today.
Cheers, Glenn. How are you?
I am good. I am very, very good, mate.
Good.
Tell me, we just had a discussion off air how to introduce yourself.
Yeah, we did.
Tell me a little bit.
Which way are we going to go about it?
Tell me, who is James? Tell me a little bit about you.
There you go. That's the question. So, as you were going to introduce me, I am a father. I am a husband. I am an ultra runner. I am a bricklayer. Like I said, as this chat will progress, you take all them labels away, and who am I? I'm not exactly 100% sure, but they're the labels at the moment at this stage of life that I have. So yeah, that's who I am.
Excellent.
Yeah.
James, I do appreciate you taking the time and coming on. I know whenever we started the podcast, you were one of the first people to reach out and go, hey, look, I want to help, I want to support, I want to share my story. And that's something that I'm very, very glad you've done and privileged that you've done. Let's start at the beginning, I suppose. What does life look like for James growing up? Young James leaving school or at school, leaving school?
At school. So growing up, I was actually born in England. I don't like to admit that I am upon, but
actually, I didn't know that. That might change the relationship.
And we moved here when I was 2, so I'm going to say that's mum and dad's best decision they've made. Anyway, for me, but anyway, and then I grew up in Australia in the northern suburbs. Still here now. I had a great childhood. We never went without anything, but never had anything too much either. Mum and dad's always made us work for our things and you know, make us appreciate what we've got. Never took anything for granted. That was a big thing, and the respect thing. Yeah. So schooling wise, everything was good. I was definitely not high in the education system. I wasn't. And just loved the sport. I've always loved sport, footy, cricket, and you know, absolutely loved all that. Especially the team sports when I was younger. And then left school at 15 to become a bricklayer. So I worked with my dad. So I went straight out of school into Balga-TAFE, which was went from a private school to Balga-TAFE, which was a bit of an eye-opener for me as a 15-year-old.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but that was mum and dad's rule that, you know, we could leave school early as long as we had something else to go into and higher education. So I did that for 3 or 4 years in apprenticeship with dad, and still to this day we're 20 years on and still working with him. So,
good. I'm interested. How's that relationship going working with?
Great. It's funny. That's the first thing people say. Normally it's like, oh, you know, and you see all these father and son bricklayer teams, and they do end up being like this. But I think again, it's a big thing to my mum and dad have brought us up that, you know, that respect level is all the time looking up to him. And yeah, there's never been a moment like, and he's always treated me fair if I treat him fair. And I try to push that onto my kids as well, you know? So
Excellent.
yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's not unsimilar to my own story. I served my time as a bricklayer and worked with my own father for quite a few years before we went different ways.
Yeah.
Your Feck It No More moment, what would you say that was? And I'm guessing, like everybody in life, you've had a few of them over the years,
Yep.
but what's the one that you think is something you'd like to share and talk about today?
So I suppose I was married at 22 or 23, my first marriage. We had children at 24. So, you know, nowadays that's classed as young, whether back in the day it wasn't, whatever, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
Whether it was too young or not, from my side of things, I think that was everything for me.
Yeah.
I built up to that point. I built my first house at 19, and the only thing that was missing was a family. So when I went down that road, I was stoked. I was really happy and content with everything. I keep trying to say it, "Feck it no more," but I don't have the accent as much as you. So if I do swear, Glenn, I apologize.
We'll bleep it out. It'll be okay.
All right, so the "fuck it no more."
Yeah.
I suppose at the age of 30, my ex-wife had an affair with somebody that I knew, and I think at that point, I actually found them, and at that point right there, I'm not an aggressive person by nature, but
Of course.
also, again, when the lines are crossed, you do what you have to do. And I looked at the situation, and I looked at my two kids and looked at them and just walked away. And for me, I don't think I never thought I had that in me. I always thought that, you know, the first thing is, you know, if that ever happens to me, I'll do this. You know how us men talk, because we're not just men, but you know what I mean? Like,
no, I know.
you know, the aggression comes out, especially with the side of things that gets taken away from you at that moment. But I suppose that was my big turnaround point, was there and then, where I realized there's more to what I am than just myself, because that would have gave me the greatest satisfaction to take things into my own hands and do that.
Yeah.
But I know the consequences of that. And I suppose there's a couple more stories that go on with that one that we'll get to, but yeah, that's probably the biggest pivotal point in my adult life. Probably I had quite a few as a teenager and in my 20s that I probably, looking back now, wish I had seen. Oh yeah, you know what? That's my turning point, but wasn't. So
you weren't quite ready for that. Yeah. Look, that I'm guessing that would have been quite a shock to the system and quite a turning point internally. I suppose after that, in the initial phase, as you're going through that, James, what emotions, what feelings are kind of going through your head? Like, how did it impact you?
So I suppose originally, first up, the world is just crumbling, like is tumbling down. And looking back now, I'm actually quite proud of how I handled it.
Yep.
There's lots of things I could have done better, but the overall picture was okay. And I think for me, having the pride of being a father and a husband to me always was, like, my parents have been married for 40 odd years. And obviously, as you can tell already how I've been speaking, I look up to them, you know, and I was brought up in that environment. And I do believe that when you go through relationships or partnerships, whether it's friends or whatever, and there is hiccups, that it should be voiced out first before anything else moves along. I suppose getting my kids taken away from me 50% of the time. I do get them 50% of the time, and it's quite funny because people turn around and go, "Oh, you're lucky because you're getting them 50% of the time." And you know, I know what they're trying to say, but from my point of view, there's a lot of people doing a lot harder, you know, that deserve more, that don't get it. But there's also guys that don't deserve it, or women who don't deserve it as well. So I think them original stages of going from having that and then having nobody with me either. Like my mum, I cannot speak more highly about the way she helped out, but made it very clear from early on that I wanted to do it myself. So there would be nights there where my children were 2 and 4 at the time. So they're very young, you know, and there's nights there where they're screaming out. They want their mum, they're screaming out. And I'm there in the hallway just bawling. Like, and, you know, like I wear my heart on my sleeve nowadays. So I'll say it as it is. And, you know, I look back at them at points and I don't actually know how I managed to push through, because there's some really, really heavy stuff that I suppose, you don't realize when you're in it, what you're actually, the emotional level you're going through. So again, I had a great support around me, but I was almost distancing myself from them people because it felt like I needed to prove something to myself. Yeah.
That feeling of, you know, my world's just been turned upside down and now I have to try and find my way through it.
Mm.
I think as men, we're quite often, especially, I can't talk for women because I'm a man, but for men especially, we kind of feel like we have to do it alone, especially in that tradie background. You know, as I grew up on bricklaying sites and grew up in that area where, you know, you're tough, you're hard, you're not meant to share your emotions, your feelings. So you're going through that, you're trying to do the best for your kids, trying to get them set up. And I understand what you just said whenever you've said that, you know, you didn't gain 50% of the time, you lost 50% of the time because, you know, you had the all of the time, now it's gone. The emotions of that period, I'm guessing it kind of went through different stages.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it goes from anger. This is just me, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing it went from anger to kind of sadness to, oh my God, what's happening, to now what's the future look like. But you tell me in your own words what that kind of journey looked like for you. And
it's always been a bit of a roller coaster of emotions, I think, because you are angry, you're upset, then it's confusion. You don't understand what you've done. You don't understand what other people are thinking. And I think one of the biggest things for me is I'm not a controlling person, but when it comes to the people closest to me, like especially my children, it's like that was all taken away. There's 50% of the time I don't even know where my children are, and no disrespect to my ex, I know they are safe. Like, so I'm not going to sit here and go, you know, like this is a horrible like all that kind of thing. That's anything that I was never worried about their safety, but at the same time, I'm not there. So I don't know what decisions are being made for my children. I don't know what they're doing or if they're so for the roller coaster that I always say of the emotions was anger, upset, and then just confusion of and not knowing at the end of that tunnel what it looked like. And I suppose dealing with it, I had two ways to deal with it, and I do another fuck it no moment. And no more moment was, I remember at this stage, I was early into my running. I was early into, you know, getting fit. And that slipped away a little bit when this happened. I was just starting to do that whilst I was with my ex. So in one way, it has saved me. Like it was my savior at that point. I remember if I did not have the kids at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, if I'm up and I could not get to sleep, I'd be in the bush. And I wouldn't tell anyone. And I only told my mum a few years later, and she had a very bit of a word with me after. She couldn't believe what I was actually saying, but it was my way of dealing with things. But originally what happened was the first couple of weeks, it was just there was no routine, there's no structure. So I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know when I had the kids. We hadn't worked out a lot of things. And,
so
you know, finances and homes and that's another element that you're pushed away. But it's there. So I had two ways of dealing with it. And then the running and the gym thing, I was like, you know what? No. So one of the first things I did do a couple of weeks in was I got a hold of my old mates I haven't seen for 10 years. And again, nothing wrong with them. But I remember the one moment I was at Hillary's at a nightclub, and I'd been drinking and everything. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was looking around, and then my mate's like, oh yeah, we're going here now and everything. And I jumped in a car, and like, I've never touched drugs in my life. I do drink, and I jumped in that car, and the next minute I looked at the person who was driving, and his eyes are popping out of his head. And I was sitting in that back seat, and I actually had a moment to myself. I'm like, what am I doing?
What's going on here?
Like, you know, like I am, my two kids, I don't know where they are. If someone was to ring me right now, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? You know, so at this particular moment, I remember we're coming through Mindarie, and I said, can you just pull over? Like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm just really hungry. And I sat at a service station, which, funny enough, was actually a service station that I grew up next to, near my old house. And that used to be my spot where I'd get dropped off. I'd have my sausage roll and everything, and then walk back home, right? And I sat on the curb, and I had my sausage roll, and I'm like, who are you? What are you doing? You know, I actually had that moment of saying, like, is that what you want? And potentially lose everything that you have built with relationships, because it was a point where if I go down and keep doing them, my mum and dad will always be there. But these other people that I'm with, they're not the people that are going to make me what I need to be, you know? So in reflection now, I was having these chats, there was connecting, but not, you know? And I remember getting up that next morning, and I think I went for a 30K run or something, and I probably would have still blown over. That's where I was at. But, and then coming back, feeling absolute shit, but realizing, and I think a couple of weeks after that was the first time I signed up for a 100K run. So it was, it was.
We'll get into the ultra running a little bit more, but do you think is the ultra running, was that a release for you? I know whenever I done endurance sports, it was just like, forget about work, forget about family. It was just my moment to breathe, move forward and feel like I was progressing.
100%. And like I always call it bandaid. It's for that at that stage of life. I got a bit more respect for what it gives me now. But at that stage of life, it was okay. Well, I don't feel good about this. I'm going to go do that. Or how can I push myself? And I always feel as though ultra running and these events that I do, swimming, biking, Ironman, whatever you choose to do, for me personally, there was so much in life that had been taken away from me that I didn't have control over anymore. I didn't have decisions to make. But that was one thing that I made my decision to put myself in that position. And when you're in that zone, it gets pulled away. But the only person who can pull that back is yourself.
Yeah.
I didn't have that over there, but I could create it here. And I almost felt like now
It gave you
looking
that
back,
sense of control.
yeah. Now looking back, it was my band-aid. It was like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? And I had so much more time, mentally drained. There's so much more time to say, well, if you don't do that, what are you going to do? So
That makes perfect sense. The moment where you kind of are in the car and you can see two different moments, that kind of, I can see and I recognize this. For me, it was eating too much, getting overweight before any sort of activity, endurance or otherwise. I could see myself getting overweight, and I could see two paths. I could see the one where I was healthy, being able to play with my kids, being around for my grandkids, and I could see the other one, which I was on at high speed, where I was getting totally unhealthy, heart attack, potentially dying at a young age. And for me, that was a big moment, a big Feck It No More moment for me. It sounds like that moment in the car might have been, even though the catalyst in the breakup was the big catalyst, it might feel like that moment might have even been closer to that point where you said, Feck It No More.
I wouldn't argue that. I think that the other one created it.
Yeah.
But that one was the deciding one, which way I wanted to go about things and how I wanted to be.
Just for the listeners, I think it would be beneficial to know, what kind of a timescale are we talking about between those two moments, James? Roughly.
It's nearly 10 years now. So I would say it might have been 4 to 5 weeks, maybe even 6.
It's not a huge time then. It's
it's not.
Close.
Yeah, I would say maybe 6. Like, let's say 6. Again, it's very, very vague in that thing. So maybe 6. Yeah, I would say 6.
Okay. Look, I'm interested in the build up to the moments, because I think a lot of people can learn from it. If you put it on, knowing now what you know 10 years later, and you think back to before that time of the marriage kind of obviously disintegrating, but what do you think you take away from the build up to that point? What stands out for you? And, I suppose it's beneficial for you to focus on what stands out for you from your perspective, but maybe, I'm happy for you to go further, but I think most people can learn from what their part in anything was. So I'm interested to know.
And I think for me, the most confusing part is like when you hear stories like this, everyone will be sitting there going, well, there's always another side to the story.
Of course.
And I love the saying, if there's 3 sides to the story, there's mine, there's hers, and there's the truth.
The
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like at the end of the day, that's can make up their own version of how they go about it. But I think for me, leading up to it, I was blindsided in a way. I truly do believe that. Like, and I think it comes down to the personality that I do have and where I was at. And that contentness of just thinking that, like life is, how can it not be great?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And I think leading up on my behalf, maybe there is stuff I could have done differently, maybe there was, but I truly do believe to this day that I did everything that I possibly wanted to. Whether that was enough or not, I don't know. I worked, I provided, I did all the things you're meant to do. I think leading up to that point, I don't know. Like maybe it was the age thing. I'm not sure.
Okay,
I don't know.
Maybe that you were too young or whatever.
Yeah, maybe, and that has been thrown around. I don't believe that, because I do believe that anything in life that you make a choice at, then you work at. It's not. There's plenty other.
I tend to agree, because we got married at 20. We had our first child at 20 as well. So we were quite young, and I don't know the future. Nobody knows the future, but thankfully together still 30 years later. So I tend to agree with you that certainly mightn't have been a factor. Look, I think the good thing is that you've maybe recognized that, hey, look, I thought I was doing everything the way I should be. So, and sometimes that can be the story in life. We can be doing absolutely everything that we're meant to be doing, and life can still kind of find a way to kick us in.
And like I say, I'm not saying that there wasn't problems, but maybe I just didn't know about it. And I suppose that's why when, like, as we go further on down the track, when I talk about my self-belief and all them kind of things, for me personally, like, it's just the talking aspect. Like, my wife, Katie, will tell me to shut up on many occasions because I overshare, I overtalk or too much. And I think I've grown into that now because it's almost a defense mechanism of what I think if had been brought to me to start with. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't change a thing. I'm over a hump now, and I've learned a hell of a lot that I would not have learned if I did not get that. So I think the talking part, I think maybe that's the one thing I can take from it, is that whether it was from me or from my ex, if there was communication on certain problems or certain things that are going on,
could have maybe gone through them.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe what I can take leading up. If anyone was there saying, well, you know what, I'm finding myself scrolling on my phone instead of being, or like, not having them things, maybe that communication of saying to the person going, you know what, like in the nicest way, like saying, well,
of course,
why don't we actually, or this is pissing me off, or that's pissing me off, or you're not doing this, like, I don't know, like maybe that's the thing I can take from the lead up. But there's no particular big thing.
There's nothing that stands out to you and think, oh, that's good. And as I say, sometimes there's not.
Yeah.
What about the aftermath? What do you take away from that? What's the big thing that stood out for you in that?
The aftermath. Well, I don't know. It's such a big question, I suppose. The aftermath from it is how them pivotal moments. And don't get me wrong, we all fall back into some of the old habits of what we have, like with the, especially before I did meet Katie, there was moments where, I would be asked to go out with mates and I would go down that. But I look at it as like a bit of a roller coaster again, not just emotions, but with the actions. And I think with a roller coaster, you're going up, 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 and you do reach a high and then you come straight down. And I think it's that part underneath that I always feel like you don't want to be down too much. You want to be climbing and to get to your peak. But I am a firm believer in you do dive, because anyone that's still peaking, there's obviously, well, maybe there is people, but I feel like you're lying to yourself, because there has to be peaks and downs. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best out of yourself if you don't go down.
Look, I'm glad you've raised that, because I've listened to a lot of content. So for the last 20 years, I've been on my own personal development journey, and I've listened to a lot of content and a lot of coaches and a lot of mentors out there, and they kind of show this life where everything's great and everything's always good. And I think that's very false, because, well, I've never experienced that in my life. It's been the highs and the lows. And I think life's like that for most people. If you think about it, the way life's structured, we all know somebody that's gonna pass away and die at some point. So you're gonna have them low times. You're gonna have times where you're feeling low, whether financially or whatever. People talk about the different seasons in their lives, and I just think that to portray a time where everybody's always happy and always on the up is it's like false advertising, because it's not real. It's not achievable. But I think the key is to be able to recognize whenever you are in that low moment, and recognize that it won't last, and do everything in your power to shorten it as much as possible, as you've just said. It's funny, because I know once I did the ultra races and the long distance stuff, I like to think of life very much like an ultra, because there will be them times where you're on top of the world and you feel great and nothing will hurt you, and then there'll be other times where you don't even think you can take another step forward.
And then 10 seconds later you feel
So for me, I just think now life's one big ultra. And
I agree. And like I say, that down bit, even to my 12-year-old son, Casey, I even say to him, when he comes home and I can see, or he's had a bad cricket game or whatever, and whether swearing or whatever's allowed with your kids and everything, I said, mate, sometimes life is shit. I said, that is the reality. You're going to get dealt cards. I said, but at the moment you're here, I said, do what you need to do, but don't spend too much time. You got to climb the ladder back up. And that's how I explained it to him already, because, you know, you could sit there and go, oh no, everything's going to be okay. Next time it's going to be fine. But next time it might not be fine.
Next time it might be worse.
Yeah. Well, I don't quite. I don't want to crash his dreams too much, but
Wish yourself on life.
He's got all that when he gets to his 20s and that. Then you can crush his dreams there. But and I think like that's probably from the outset. Going back to the original question, go from the outset. That's what I've probably taken the most, is that, you know, the ride to where I'm at now. There's been plenty of highs, but if I didn't have the lows, I wouldn't be reaching for the highs.
And you wouldn't appreciate them as much.
No, and that is the one thing I do take away from what happened is I do sit here and I say, you know, I just sit sometimes and I'll just spend 20 minutes to myself and say, you know what, like, look what you've actually got. But I did do that before, but I'm not saying you do take it for granted, but definitely when something's taken away from you, you realize what you've got in your hands, as much as annoying it might be for Katie, but you know, the appreciation's a big one. So yeah.
Of course. I just want to take you back till that moment. You're sitting on the side of the road beside the servo, and you are contemplating life. What did that vision look like for you then moving forward, James? Like how do you get into that space of, I need to start turning this ship around? I think for people listening, this is maybe worth spending a little bit of time on, because there will be people out there that are listening to this right now, going through a very similar thing, just through a recent breakup, feeling like life just all confused, chaos, not knowing where to go. What did it look like for you? And I suppose, what advice would you give to other people in that moment?
Yeah, I think for me personally, like, I contradict myself a little bit on this one, but like, I learned quickly there that because I do love my kids, I love my family so much, that's what I was aiming for, to do everything for them. Okay. But at that particular moment, like, and there's similar other little times where I just stop and refresh and just say, you know, like, for them to have anything from me is me to be right. So I need to put the time into myself, because at that point I was obviously looking at making other decisions or other choices that are not beneficial for myself. So in the long run, wouldn't be beneficial for people around me. And I am a person, I like to please others. I want to help others. Like, you know yourself, the amount of running I've done with other people, pushed so many people through. I realized that if I'm not doing the work for myself, then they don't get it. So I suppose when I was sitting there having their moments, I may not have particularly said them words, but I'm there and I'm thinking, well, what the fuck, what am I doing? Like, if I was on the outskirt and I was my son or my daughter, would I be looking at me going, oh, there's dad, 3 o'clock in the morning with a sausage roll half probably down my chest rather than in my mouth? Yeah. Or would I be like, okay, well, I might not be here in the morning, guys, but I'll be here an hour later because I ran 30Ks. Doesn't mean you have to be running the 30Ks, but the positive impact of saying, you know, I'm doing this rather
doing
than
something positive, adding to your life.
Yeah, and I think whether at that point I probably wasn't saying or mapped it out like that, but I was probably sitting there going, well, if you want these things, how do you think they should be looking at you? Yeah. If that makes.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. What I heard from that, and it's similar to what I kind of know from my own story, but whenever I'm working with other people, James, it's that why. Like, why do I want to get there? For you, that sounds like it was for your kids and for your family, to make sure that you were showing up to be the best version of yourself for them. So that was a very strong why, and it is for a lot of people. But I suppose if you don't have that why, or aren't able to tap into that why or understand that why, then that's where you can go down another road very.
And I suppose that other road is the other why, if that makes sense, because why not? You know, and I think that why not?
Exactly.
And
that's a good question.
I still have that in me to this day. Like, I know for a fact I've stuffed up a couple of times where, you know, I will choose, if I'm not in the right headspace, and alcohol is a big one for me. If I'm not in the right headspace and I am having a beer, my decisions are shit. And I have made some real bad decisions when I've been drinking. But if I am in the right headspace, it is such a good night. And so, like, I don't have a problem with drinking, but there's a problem sometimes when I'm drinking. But I know now, I've learned to just say no when that's not there. And I think at that moment when I'm going through all that shit, I thought that could be the answer. And I think that was a bit of a draw. And then I think if that was more powerful than the why, not the why not, I think that's where I'm maybe in my head at that point You know,
Yeah.
I sort of made the switch, and I'm like, you know what? And again, like I said, it's a roller coaster though. You don't go through
Yeah.
life without making shit choices still. And like I say, so many years on, still on that Wednesday when they go over changeover, trust me, the first thing I want to do is go have a beer. Like, and that is my first fallback, and is have a beer, sit out, and I'll relax. But I realize that if I go run 12 to 15 kilometers in the bush, and then I sit in the car, and I'm thinking, well, you know what? I actually feel good.
Yeah. One's
You
going to
know?
have a positive impact on your life. One's going to have a negative
And
impact on your life.
and again, it's that why not? And don't get me wrong, every now and again I do the why not, and I sit down, I have a beer,
Yeah, sure.
and then I'm like, why? But at the
Yeah.
same time, also at a stage of life where I'm like, well, there's a reason why I did, and again, that comes
Yeah.
down to that I am not an addict or anything like that, so I can switch on
Yeah.
and off, like, you know, so
Of course.
which would be scary if it was, because then, you know, you need to obviously put things in place that, you know, but yeah, I think that's probably the more why and why not. That's how I would look at it, and I always wanted to do.
I really like the way you explain the why not part. I've often looked at the why, but the why not, as you just said, is just as important.
Yeah.
What do you say to somebody that's going through the exact same thing right now recently? What advice would you give to them?
Well, I think the why not is so easier.
Yeah.
Unless there's an addiction involved or something like that. Don't get me wrong, I can't speak like that because I'm not
Of course.
in that. So
Yeah.
the why not is a complete different thing if you were addicted to
Yeah.
anything, you know. So I think the why not is such an easier option in my personal opinion, not anyone else's, but the why not. But the why is always the harder, tougher road. And it's another thing I do say to my kids is majority of things in life that are tough and hard to do are worth doing. The things that are easy and get you there, there's no shortcuts. So you can do that shortcut for a little bit. That why not will always be there on your shoulder.
Yeah.
So it's like you can do the whys 95% of the time, that 5% can make you. And again, that's the things for me. If there was somebody coming to talk to me and they would be like, you know, and it doesn't have to be running. My outlet was running, so it could be anything. It could be reading a book, like whatever. But I think that the heart, if you're sitting there going, I'll do that, and it's easy compared to, or maybe we'll have a look at that, you get so much more out of it. And I would just tell them to experience that bit before they keep choosing that. So it's experiencing both.
Yeah. Quite often the why not will kind of, as you said, it's easy. And if we go the easy route, it keeps us in our comfort zone. And what we know for sure is if we're in our comfort zone, we're not growing, we're not progressing, and we're not developing. If it's harder, if it's something that we really, I always kind of, the way I explain it to a lot of people I work with, but the way it looked like for me in my own head was, what is it that I want to create? And now you're not going to know, most people won't know what they want to create 2 years down the line or 3 years or 4 years down the line. Some people will, but the majority of people won't have an idea what that is. So if you can't think that far out ahead, I would explain, what do I want my life to look like next week or the week after or 6 months down the line? Try and get it to the point where you can at least get to that point and then move forward.
Again, from a runner's point of view, not everyone will get this, but from a runner's point of view, when you explain life's like an ultra, that's just your next aid station. So in 3-4 weeks' time, that's your aid station. So, you know, if you're running a marathon, you got 42 kilometers, you're going to have 10 aid stations in that section. So you need to break it down into that point. And I do believe that, like, I think looking at the end goal sometimes, especially in the position I was in when I'm sitting in that curb, that's why I said it wasn't there, because I couldn't picture 10 years down where I am now, or even just being okay with it. I'm not okay with it, but like just being content with kind of things that are out of your control, letting go. If you're trying to do it too early, I think that's where you explode, and then that why not is there. Whereas if you're breaking it down and going, you know what, if I can get to next week, if I can go to the week after, or I can get to a month, I think that's a big one. Like it's the same as these runs that you've done them yourself. If you say I'm going to run 200 miles, it's like, shit, you can't do that. But if you break it down, you do all the training leading up to it, and you train for 24 months or whatever it is, and you do the nutrition, you do everything you possibly can. You're breaking it down to get there. It's not run on that day. So, yeah.
I always said I didn't have to run 200 miles. I just have to run 1 mile 200 times. So because running 1 mile is what you
And I think everything that we've talked about and your previous chats
Yeah.
and whenever I've talked to you in the past and it all comes down to that mindset. And that there
Yeah.
to me is mindset.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at 200 miles, you're looking at 201 miles. Like, so you're breaking that down. And I suppose at that point, that pivotal point,
Yeah.
that's how I would have been breaking it down without even knowing it.
Yeah. And,
You know?
and look, understanding you're going through a hard time, especially in life. Like I can remember going through periods of my life where I thought this just isn't going to get better. And I'm talking more so now as a young child, maybe a few things happening with alcoholism in the house. And I'm just imagining this is never going to get better. And every day, every week, every month seems to be the same thing. And you're thinking this isn't going to improve.
Yeah.
But the goal at that point, whenever you're in that stage, is to get to the next day, get to the next day, get to the next day, and realize and believe. I think you have to have a real strong belief that things will get better, because as soon as we start believing things can improve, we usually then start getting the answers of how we can improve things, if that makes sense. I just think that hard times are going to come to us all in different shapes and sizes over life, and whenever they do come, if we just keep going through that hard time, believing that things will get better.
And I think that comes that we talked about a little bit beforehand. I think that does come down to self-belief. And I think like a lot of people take a long time to build that part. And I still, like I have openly said to you, I still struggle with that part. And whether that is from the divorce, but I do believe that has been from me, my personality all the way up. So that self-belief of being strong enough for the people that I care for and I'm providing for or there for. I think there when you do switch that mindset to say, you know what, like this is belief. I think a lot of people out there, just from my personal opinion, I would just say you're not always going to be able to self-believe that will get better. And that is also okay.
And that's a really good point, because while you're in that moment, I think as the years go by and you get further and further away from it, like that's probably 30, 40 years ago now, 40 years ago, that I would have been in that really shit moment of thinking this is never going to get better. Whenever you're there, you don't think things are going to get better. But being able to hear from people who've been there and have lived through that, and then found that things did get better, that's where the little spark of it was around people that had gone through similar things or were going through similar things, and that had got out of the other side of it and had said, hey, look, this will get better. I think the more, but you're right, internally you still have to get to that point where you believe it yourself. I just think now is maybe a good time to jump into the self-belief thing.
Yeah.
The way you had just said it there, where you're not sure if it had come from the breakdown of the first marriage, did you notice self-doubt before that, James? I'm interested to know, whenever you think back.
On reflection, like this is all probably fresh for me to speak about, and I'm quite happy speaking. Like I was just about to say before, I think that's what's important about this. Like I said to you coming on to here, I don't really have a story to tell, and I don't really have anything. But if somebody can hear anything, like the speaking, and like you just said, then when you realize other people have gone through things or I think that's such an important part, and that's why I have thrown my hand up and said, yep, whatever. Like I'm cool to come in and have a chat. So looking back, I do believe that is a part of my personality. So I do believe that self-belief thing has been there. And in my previous relationship, it would have been there. And maybe that was the added stress. Maybe that was a little bit of the thing of me needing the reassurance that I am doing the right thing. I know I'm doing the right thing, but sometimes it is reassurance. And you know, we can joke and all this and that, but everyone is structured completely different. So it's reassurance of knowing I am doing what I'm meant to be doing. So I think forever, and I've never been one to care what others think of me. I'm not really that way inclined. I like everyone is different again. So like if you think I'm a wanker, that's all good. Like that's okay. But the people that I do care about, I do care what they think, and I do care what they, you know, it's another thing I do put on the kids. I do say to them, you know, if they come home and they're like, such and such a school's got this and that, I said, how do you feel about this person? Like, is it, and they're like, oh, well, I don't really know them. I said, well, do you know, like, does it really, I know age is a complete different conversation, but the people that do matter, I think has always been a big thing on my shoulders that I need to make sure I'm doing the right thing by them, like respecting them and being worthy of them, like, and I think that's what I put high up on my list is the people that I do have in my circle, especially now. I respect them. They're there for a reason, like, you know, so I feel like I need to be doing them things that they value. And I think I struggle sometimes not knowing or thinking that I'm not. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does. Look, I suppose over the last few years, especially since I went and I done that result course, I listened to the way that people say things, James, because the language we use, whether it's internally or externally, says a lot about sometimes the way we're thinking. Now, you just mentioned that before you kind of had went on to explain that self-doubt, that you don't think you had a story to tell, or you don't think that maybe people were going to get any value from that. So that language in itself
self-doubt.
sounds. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that language doesn't just creep in overnight. That is
Yep.
something that is built over years of habits
Yep.
and behaviors. Now I know you're a very inspirational person because I've been around you enough, and I also know that you've went on and you've done some amazing things. And I obviously wouldn't have guessed from the outside that self-doubt was something that you maybe struggled with. Yet whenever we stop and we think about it and I hear you say little things like that, it does make sense. I asked you earlier and I'll ask you again, where do you think that self-doubt is maybe going to impact you the most? Maybe in the past? But now moving into the future, because I also want to, whenever we're talking to people, make sure we're setting them up for the future as well. What do you think that may impact you in the future, that self-doubt?
So for me personally, I feel conflicted about it as well, if I'm completely open, because I think without the self-doubt, I'd be half the person I am. So like, it's a very like the devil on the shoulder, the angel on the shoulder kind of thing. So because the self-doubt is what pushes me to do the things I do to be better. But as I'm learning is to control that balance, because you really need to have that intact. So I think when you're going, I'm not there yet, I'm nowhere near it, but I think going forward, I'm very mindful now of how much pressure I put on myself to improve on them things. Relationships is a big one. So, and again, I see the negative impact it does have on my marriage and with my kids and with close families, close people in my family as well, because sometimes we do let it out in front of the people that we are most comfortable with. So because I do feel like it's a bit of a pressure cooker. So the self-doubt is shaking us, and we are working on things, but every now and again it does pop to the surface and it sort of releases. So, and I feel like I'm comfortable, unfortunately for my wife, Katie, I'm comfortable with when I do get to that pressure point, and she's always been supportive and doesn't mind me, but for me personally, that puts the added stress on self-doubt, because then I'm like, well, these people, why would they want them issues coming? Not saying they've ever said that's not, but and then it is a spiral. So I don't know if that makes sense. For me, the biggest impact negatively would be on relationships with people, but the positive impact builds me to be the better person. So it's definitely that seesaw action.
The self-doubt pull you back when the push to be a better version of yourself for the self-doubt, which isn't uncommon, because really, whenever we talk about development, self-growth, whatever title you want to put on it, self-improvement, it comes down to taking yourself to a better place than where you were before. Now, whenever we look at self-doubt can kind of impact in lots of different ways, maybe on what you feel you can achieve. Now, I would say, while you doubted you could do a lot of the endurance events you done, you still pushed yourself to go and do them, which kind of ticks that box. So I've done a 50K, I can do a 100K, I can do a 100 miler, you do 200 mile, and you tick them boxes along that journey. And it's good to overcome them. But it's harder to tick them boxes whenever it comes to relationships. It's harder to tick them boxes whenever it comes to kind of self-belief and what you can go on and achieve, whether in different aspects of your life, career, or finances, or anything else. I want to let's stay on the relationships for just a second. That self-doubt, does that come from a thing of I'm not good enough for the people around me, or does it look like I need to be better for the people around me? What does it look like in your head? What version shows up
I think
in your
bit
head?
of both. As you're asking me that question, I think the one thing that comes to my head is sometimes the actions I like, say how I'm dealing with something, I may take the step back and think about it, and I'm not happy with how I dealt with it. I would have preferred to deal with it another way. But that doesn't mean that I'm dealing with it wrong, because then when I reflect on it a bit later on, it's actually okay. And I've worked up this whole thing in my head where really the situation is resolved, everyone is okay, and we've actually everything is okay. So I think a little bit of that is my reaction. I'm not happy with how I construct myself sometimes with other people or
Do
conflict. Conflict's a big one for me. I don't like conflict, and I am one that will try to stay away from it, and then I probably compensate when I am, and we have the ongoing joke that sometimes I can just need to be a little bit less passionate. We use the word passionate because it's like once I'm in, but I can let a lot of things go. But when I'm in. So and I don't like that part. And I think that's the part where when I reflect back, I'm like, oh well, well, if you're doing this, you could have done that, and I think that's the bit that gets me down a little bit. I don't know.
No, that makes sense. A lot of times whenever I'm working with people and they have that self-doubt, they're also, for some weird reason, people that set very high standards for themselves as well. Perfectionists, sometimes people will call. Any sorts of perfectionist challenges for you? Is there, have you somebody that high standards, or what? How does that look for you?
I have pretty high standards. Like in most aspects of life. I think that comes from how I am, just how I've grown as a person. And I think respect's a big one, like I've said many a times. And I think like, I don't know, the high standard side of things is whether if it's at work or whatever, there's a standard that needs to be upheld, and if it's not, then it's not good enough. I think that does. I've never had anyone ask me that, and I suppose that is probably a part of it. And I suppose that's where I struggle a little bit with the kids, and that's probably the self-doubt thing. Is I have a standard to upheld, and sometimes it's not. Whereas on reflection, that standard probably should be able to be moved up and down a little bit at times when it's recalled. But for me, I can openly say at that point, it's like, well, no, that this is the line, and I'm not OCD, I'm not over the top or anything like that. I just see this is, I feel like I've got my lines, and if they're not met, then I suppose I do struggle with that a little bit, and especially when it comes to, again, I put a little bit of pressure on the kids, is because I see them as a reflection of me as well. So I want to make them, and I do say this to them, I want to make them better than I am. And that doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. I say that to them. I said, because they were like, oh, what did you do when you were a kid? I said, that does not matter, because what I did, I'm trying to teach you before you're going to make heaps of stuff up. So I'm open with that. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, but I'm trying to teach you to, have a little bit of a different road. So but standards wise, and I suppose perfectionist is one way. It's the same as when I've gone into the running, like I don't get caught up in times and all that kind of thing. But if I've got a goal, then a lot of the times I will get there.
I want to try and achieve it. It's something that I know it's something I struggled with, because self-doubt was something. Somebody asked old Glenn what was his main traits. Self-doubt, lack of confidence, I would say, was the big ones for me, until I realized it was really holding me back on what I could achieve. And I wanted to achieve lots of things at high standards. I wanted to do lots of things, but I was kind of held back, or I don't want to say the word crippled because it's maybe too over the top, but it felt like my self-doubt or my lack of confidence was holding me back from the things I wanted to achieve. Because I was putting such a high standard, I would have classed myself at certain times. Well, certainly after I got out of school. While I was in school, I would never have called myself a perfectionist, because I struggled to read and write. But certainly whenever I went down the bricklaying route and I was building things, I liked to have things as perfect as possible. I won competition for bricklaying and things like that too. So
it's been lost in the trade a little bit, but anyway, keep going.
I set myself, or I used to pride myself on thinking, I need to be a perfectionist. I have to be a perfectionist. The problem that comes with that is whenever you have that underlying self-doubt, that puts a lot of pressure on you to achieve a high standard, a very high standard. And it wasn't years down the line until I realized that continuous improvement is a much better standard to set for yourself, because perfection isn't realistic, first and foremost, because things can always get better. If we look at the history and everything from the beginning of time, we've always found a way to improve any aspect of life or what we're doing. So the fact of perfection means we've hit the limit. That's as high as things can go. Whereas continuous improvement means we can always get better. So whether it's around your relationships, if you've got this idea that it has to be a certain standard and you're putting yourself under pressure to get to that underlying self-doubt, you're always questioning, am I going to be good enough to get to that standard? Whereas as soon as you change it to, continuous improvement. I want to be a better father, husband, friend than I have been in the past. And I want to continue to get even better as the days go on. That's not as daunting. How does that sound in your mind whenever you say it? Does that make sense?
That's the first I heard of it. That's why it's not very often I'm quiet, but that was good. I was actually listening. No, like that makes a heap of sense. And I suppose, again, what it all comes down to is the shifting of the mindset. So again, instead of that 200 miles to 100 miles, like what you're saying there is you may have this level, but what are you putting in place to get to that point? And the improvement doesn't mean you're going to get to that point. It's just the improvement. That's what I'm getting from it. It's to take that bar away and be content with general improvement rather than saying I need this.
Because if you take that bar away, that doesn't mean, now again, I listen to the way you say things, and the way you said that doesn't mean you might get there. So that's that little bit of self-doubt versus I take that bar away and that means I can go higher. That's belief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
So again, the continuous improvement means, hey, I didn't know that before this discussion, but I now know that and I can start putting that in place. And for me, that made it was a big mental shift for me because it meant that I hadn't to worry about reaching a certain level or being a certain person. I just had to worry about getting better every day. Like I'm sure if we go back to your beginning of running, you didn't think you were going to go on and you were going to run 200 miles or things like that. You just wanted to learn how to run maybe 5K, 10K, I'm guessing was what you think. But at some point you removed that limit from yourself and you were able to go much above that. And I think that theory, that approach, and all the research and all the science out there shows that. You don't listen to me, go and do some research. The listeners, you don't have to listen and take my word on this. I encourage everybody to go and follow up and do their own research. But all the research shows that once we can buy in and change from that perfectionist mindset, that high standard that we set for ourselves, into a continuous improvement, that people's stress levels start to lower, their anxiety starts to lower, their self-doubt then becomes more and more improved as time goes on. I'm guessing you've got some sort of a story in your head that you tell yourself, I have this self-doubt and it's there. You said that out loud. So what I want you to imagine leading into the future is that you change that story. Because our mind's nothing but really the stories we tell ourselves and the things that we believe. So as soon as you start saying, I'm going to change from having self-doubt and I'm going to get better and I'm going to work on that every day and I'm going to, improve that, then you can start changing that. Whereas if you continue with the story that you have and saying, actually, I've always had self-doubt, it's just who I am. And I used to tell myself that. I used to thought it was, this is just who I am. I'm stuck like this forever. But as soon as I started to change the story and say, well, actually, I'm trying to learn how to get rid of that self-doubt and how to become more confident and how to, be able to focus on more relationships. Once I told myself them things, then the narrative in my head started to change and then my actions started to change as well, James. Yeah. So for yourself or for anybody out there listening that might be kind of working against self-doubt, and I said to you offline, I'm happy we'll maybe set up, if you want, to do a couple of more one-on-one sessions about what that self-doubt looks like in the future. We'll do that. But for me, the simple change that you can make from today, you don't have to continue to tell yourself self-doubt is something that I struggle with. You can choose to tell yourself self-doubt is something that I'm overcoming and I'm getting better with every single day. Does that make sense?
100%. And I suppose a lot of aspects in life, that's what I would say if I felt like I had an issue, is I'm going to change it. But I suppose that one right there, I've never actually had someone tell me that, like even saying it. I know for a fact, like saying things is, again, I do fall back on the running side of things a lot.
Yeah.
Constantly, it's not lying to yourself, but just tell yourself you can do it, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. So I suppose it's the same sort of shift, but I've never really looked at it that way. Yeah.
No, and I know I hadn't either. Like I was, my confidence really started where I decided I wanted to become more confident in the swim as part of my triathlon. And whenever I focused on, well, okay, my confidence got better in that one space. What if I started to apply that mindset to the other aspects of my life? How much more could it improve? So look, I think that's a really good discussion. In terms of the self-doubt moving forward, so now what I would encourage you to do, or anybody listening, is to think of yourself and see yourself as somebody that is on that journey to get more self-confidence. Because what's the opposite of self-doubt? It's more self-belief or confidence, whichever you think of, whatever title fits for you best in your mind, and then keep telling yourself you're working towards that on a regular basis and figure out what you need to do. That would be the first step. There is a couple of NLP techniques that we can do, and we maybe do one of them at a different stage, and if you're happy, we share it. But if not, we'll keep it behind the doors. What comes next for James? What's next on James's focus? What are you currently focusing on for you at this moment in time?
In what aspect? Just in.
It's a very open question.
Well, right now it would be about more self-belief.
Okay. So your Feck It No More moment from today is I want more self-belief, and that's something I'm going to work on.
To be honest, and like I said to you before this, I originally was like, I'll give you a hand, Glenn. I'll come on and help you. You know, like, you know, if that's something you think is a story, then I'm more than happy. But I did say to you at the start that as much as it is also for me, because that part there has always been a struggle from as long as I can remember. So. So that aspect, and I think, and I will follow up with you, and I will chat with you and do them things, because again, I don't want to be hypocritical, and I think if there is somebody who can help or guide, then that's the only way you learn. And again, that's why it's great that doing things like this, and so from that point, and especially with my relationships with the people that are around me, not that they're bad, but I would like them to improve.
If they're even stronger, it's a bonus.
Yeah, and they're as strong as they can. Well, they're as strong as I feel strong. Like, so, but improvement is always the way, like I say in any other aspect. But yeah, that will definitely be on the list.
Okay, well let's. I'm happy to make a commitment now here that in a couple of weeks' time you come back. We purely focused on what that self-doubt's looking at that stage. But remember, we've already talked about that perfection thing is now a thing of the past. You're no longer.
We're going to look at what the self-belief is like, not the self-doubt, because we're already changing the words. You said looking at the self-doubt, so we'll look at the self-belief.
Exactly. So we're coming back to see where your self-belief is in 2 weeks' time. I like that. Thank you very much.
No, that's all right.
And the perfection thing is now a thing of the past. It's just continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Focus on that reframing of things, James, from that negative to the positive, right? In that self-doubt space, you continuously, every time you have a thought in your head, and the way this will look like internally for you or for the listeners that's maybe going along with this, something will pop into your head, and it might be that old story that say, oh, you're not really good enough to do that. I don't think you're capable of that, or you're not getting this right. That's what it will come in. But whenever that thought pops into your head, what I want you to do for the next 2 weeks is to go, actually, no, that's bullshit. What is the actual truth? What am I working towards? How do I reframe that from that negative thought to a more positive thought? So if we take, I'm not good enough, I'm not giving enough to this relationship. If you can question that and go, okay, actually I'm showing up, I'm doing these things, but what can I do to even better? That's a positive kind of mindset that we're taking rather than the negative. So always look for that positive frame for the next 2 weeks. It's about building a habit. You know how important habits and repetitiveness is whenever we're doing anything and working towards. So if you stick with that for the next 2 weeks, you'll get good results. And we'll come back. We'll just talk about it where you are, and we'll talk about how else. Try and think how else you're wanting to improve and get to that continuous improvement. What that looks like for your life in terms of the areas, and we'll have a little chat on that. But outside of that space, let's focus for a little bit on the ultra runner that might be listening and might be wanting to know what races is James doing next? What's coming up?
So last year I did the 200-mile Delirious West 200-mile, and I retired from running, never to run again. I got it on camera that I'll never run again, but it only took me, I think, 2 or 3 months of not running to have a pretty hectic schedule for the next 18 months. So
yes, you do.
I just finished a swim run actually on Saturday with my mate Pat, and my wife did it with one of her friends. So that's 20 odd Ks of running, trail running, and 6 Ks of swimming with your shoes on in the water.
How was that event, James? Actually,
it's great. Fantastic. So I've done it 4 times now. So that I keep going back, and it's just it's down south in Dunsborough and Yelling Up, and you're literally running on the most beautiful trails to snorkeling spots. It did like stingrays, the fish. It is stunning. Like they take it quite serious. It's the triathlete sort of group, so they're into it. Whereas me and Pat are there with our banana speedos on, not looking at our watches at all. taking life really seriously. But no, that was fantastic. I couldn't talk about it. They've just been overtaken by another company as well, but couldn't fault any of it. Absolutely perfect. So but then we've actually I got a big year ahead because my mate Pat's been trying to get me to do an Ironman for quite so many years. And in my little break that I had off running, I got a little bit weak, and I said, well, I'll do one if you run a 100-mile and a 200-mile. So November is the Feral Pig 100-miler, and then next April is 200-miler Delirious again. But
so you're going back to the 200-miler again. I like it.
But and we'll do a few things leading up to that.
Excellent. I might join you on the Feral Pig, I think.
And I know where that leads to.
Well, it'll lead to either me chasing you down the trail or you chasing me down the trail.
Yeah, or effing and blinding next to each other,
crying in a corner,
having that roller coaster of life. No, I'm looking forward to getting back out there, to be honest. And like I say, a lot of my running is not as much as it's for myself, it's for other people. So there's a few people that I'll be dragging along throughout the thing. And we're actually doing a walk together in a couple of weeks' time for Spoke to a Bloke. So it's a 25k walk that you
tell me a little bit about that. Tell me a little, because obviously you organised the team, you and Ash. Was it involved? Why are we doing it?
Last year, a mate of ours, Ben, him and his boss just slung us a message and said, hey, there's a walk, 25-kilometer walk, no strings attached. It's just a bit of fundraising to just get men talking, to be honest. And and I was just like, yep, let's do it. So we did that last year. And then when it come up this year, I thought it's such I think leading, as of what I've talked to you about, I would like to, I suppose, go down that avenue one day. And I really wish I kind of had already, because not saying as I get older, but like being younger and going through that stuff, and so much men going through hardship. I had such a good team around me and a team I built, and I can only imagine what stress that would have been if you didn't.
If you hadn't.
So so if you didn't have that there, and I suppose this Spoke to the Bloke thing, I haven't gone into it too deep yet, but this year I've tried to fundraise as much as possible, but I will probably contact them at some point, because I do feel as though the concept of getting guys to speak again while I'm on here is a massive thing. Like, because there's so much out there where people feel like they are alone, but you don't have to be. And that's the reason why I run with the guys I do, is we literally talk crap. And every now and again there might be a life problem, but my life problems are solved by talking crap with them for that hour or so. So that Spoke to the Bloke walk is more just getting a group of guys together and just having a chat. And that's I
think it's a real powerful concept, because I've worked in mining sites and I've worked in construction pretty much all my life, and we don't talk about the important things or the emotions or the feelings that we maybe should be talking about. We talk a lot about insignificant things. And we hide a lot of stuff.
There was a lot of last year. There was a lot of talks of mining sites. Guys who have taken their lives and committed suicide, and that is a big thing. As much as I am, you want to stop all of that, I still think it's just as important for the guys out there that may not be suicidal or may not want to, do that, but just to be talking. Because
somebody that's going through a hard time.
Yeah, and I suppose that is the level. I've personally not really been down that road, being close enough, I suppose. There's always things that have happened, but I feel like if you don't get on top of things, I can see how that can roll. So if you can get people talking before we even get to that stage, again, not talking about, I can't talk for people who are addicts or actually suicidal and things like that, but if I can, maybe I would be if I didn't have people that I felt comfortable talking to. So I think this one, I haven't done my full research into the actual company and everything, but last year was great. And then they do like a little nice feed at the pub, and it's just a nice atmosphere. So I think for me personally, it's more just to get blokes out there to say, like, it's not weak, it's not soft. It's you can just chat. And I think it's getting better.
I do.
But it's
I totally agree.
It's still, for me, it's up there with, and I can only go on my own personal experiences being left out like that. And that's when you said about this podcast is more about building a community. For me, like, if you don't mind me saying, like, if there's anyone out there that has gone through similar things to me or is in that phase, like, just pick up the phone, because there's just the chat sometimes of saying, hey, how did this happen, that happen, is like, I think can be vital. So
no, look, I really appreciate you saying that, and I think it's important. If you're happy, we can share your details at the end of this. I'll put them in the show notes, and anybody that wants to reach out to you certainly can do. Likewise with myself. For me, it is about sharing them them moments. Obviously there's a lot of stigma around men that's not sharing and not talking about things. However, I've worked with enough females now at this stage as well to know that they're going through very similar things.
Yeah.
And it is a case that I just think the more we can talk about a potential challenge or problem, the more we can overcome it, the easier we can, because it's that old thing of who's gone through it before, more ideas, more solutions, more potential for the right outcome. So,
and like we just said before, sometimes it's not actually, well, it is talking about the problem, but indirectly, sometimes it is as good as going for a run and not even talking about it and taking your mind off it for that hour, or sitting there having a coffee and just talking, like say men or women, but that was just more on a personal level. It's just, but
oh no, 100%.
Yeah.
I totally get it. As I said, for me, even if you look at the suicide rates of men, it's like 3 or 4 times higher than females.
Yep.
Now, in my own extended family, I've had male and female commit suicide. So I know that it can happen to both, and I know that if we can just talk and work our way through any problem, any challenge, like we've talked about, a problem. What title would you put on it? Would you say now, looking back at it, it was a problem, a challenge, or a kind of turning point? What the first breakup? What do you call that now at this stage?
Oh, that's my new beginning. I always say my new beginning.
So I like that. I like that a lot. You see that as your new beginning.
So going back to that, again was another pivotal point just after the servo thing, was I have a chance here now to rebuild what I want.
Excellent.
So, and that's what was in my head. So even flowing into, I am remarried, flowing into who I remarried, like she does solo swims to Rottnest. Not that makes me like love her more, but we have common interests. So I wanted to build something that, like, so I looked at it as a new beginning, and even the friends I hang out with, nothing wrong with the old friends, but I don't hardly speak to any of them, because now I have my group of mates that got similar interests and similar things that I do. So for me, it was a new beginning. I looked at everything before. I don't forget about it, and I don't regret any of it, because it's got me to where I am.
Part of who you are.
Yeah. And I always just, again, I am proud of rebuilding that with the people around me, but on my own. So I had somebody say to me the one time that you're lucky, because if this has happened, you wouldn't have found Katie, or you wouldn't have this life. And I said, well, that had nothing to do with my ex or that situation. That was on me. So I'm not lucky, because
that wasn't luck. That took work.
That wasn't luck. That was bloody hard work. So I would say my answer would be just a new beginning. And at that time, it felt like the end. So that's the quite interesting part, because it was the end. The whole world's crashing. But on reflection, that was the start of a new beginning, of to build who I am and what I want to be.
That is really, really powerful, James. I used to look at things that were holding me back as problems and things going wrong in my life. But whenever I started to look at them as an opportunity or a challenge, I quite like challenges. That's why I do the crazy endurance stuff. So once I started to look at problems not as problems, but as a challenge that I have to overcome, it changes the perspective in it. And again, comes back to that reframing tool that we talked about earlier. It takes this is a problem in my life, this is holding me back, this is negative, and it turns into, this is a challenge that I have to overcome, and it's something that I haven't learned yet, which is a positive, but I really like the way you said it, that was your new beginning. So I think that's a really strong message for people to take away today, is what you're going through now might seem like the end of the world. However, if you choose, it can be the new beginning for the rest of your life as well. So I really appreciate that. I like that a lot. James, anything else you'd like to add before I stop the recording and sign off from the listeners?
No, all good. I just hope that someone out there listening to, and if not, then it's been good to have a chat anyway. Because so no, and like I said, if anyone out there is like, I do like what you're trying to build here in a community sense, and I think anyone, like I said, I don't have a story, just jump on here, have a chat, because it's only that one person that So I think the more people that are getting on here to chat, the bigger you can just fix to one person. I think that's my thing. Like, so
I think that's so true.
Can't hurt.
And I do appreciate your time today. I know time's very valuable to everybody, but I do appreciate you taking the time to jump on.
Now, again, I want to take a moment and really thank James for coming on the show today, to bear that emotion of that very hard time for him, so that other people can get something from it, something that can help them move from where they currently are to a better place. That is very brave, very courageous, being so open and raw about what he was going through at that time and how he rebuilt his life after that. If you've got something from James's message, please leave it in the comments. Show how it's impacted you or what you're currently going through and how it relates to your story. Maybe what you took away from it. What was the thing that stood out most to you? If you know somebody that will get the benefit of some of the information in this, please share it with them. Our biggest challenge, as I mentioned to James before the show, is not the value of the information that we have. It's being able to expand that reach, to grow our community so that people can hear the information that they need, so they can get the help that they need. If you're currently out there and you're really going through a hard time, you're not quite sure what to do next, please hit the link in the booking notes below. Make an appointment. Let's have a chat. If you think, Glenn, it's not going to work for me, no issues at all. If you think, Glenn, I'd like to come on, I'd like to share my story, I'd like to be able to get some support along that journey from yourself and from the community, we'd love to hear from you. And again, we're going to jump into the boring legal part. I am not a registered mental health expert. My formal training is from results coaching, so I can help people get from where they are to where they want to go. What I do have is 20 years of personal development experiences where I've listened to all the experts, where I've read countless books to help my life improve and get me to a better place. And for the last few years, I've been helping others get from where they are to where they want to go. And now we're taking this on a bigger stage and we need your help. But always remember, this is your life, you're in control, you make the decisions. Thanks for listening and I hope you're well.